morning. We'll bring this meeting to order, and we'll start with call to order.
Wonderful. Roll call. Directors Penn, Dwyer, Anzini, Mansfield, and Day present. General Manager Van Day are present. General Counsel Polson present. Board Clerk Ditmore present.
All right.
President Anzini, all directors are present. A quorum is established.
Okay, we will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Director Dwyer, would you lead us off?
Certainly will. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we will now move on to adopting the agenda. There's been a request that we move. Okay. Hang on. Yeah, there's been a request that we move item G13, G11 up to above H13. Okay. So that way we have a continual legal way of doing our business. Okay, now.
I move adoption of the agenda.
I'll second.
All right. Are there any members of the public who wish to discuss anything about this agenda?
We will now open public comment on the adoption of today's agenda. If you're present in the boardroom and wish to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name for the record. Virtual participants may refer to the instructions provided on the first page of today's agenda. President Anzini, it does not appear that any member of the public is wishing to speak. Would you like me to call for the vote?
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion to adopt today's agenda moved by Director Day and seconded by Director Dwyer. We're ready for the vote.
Okay. Members vote.
And motion passes.
Now we'll move on to item number C. Public comments regarding items not on the agenda. Any member of the audience willing to come and speak about items that are not on the agenda, this is your opportunity.
We will now open public comment on items not on today's agenda. If you're present in the boardroom and wish to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name for the record. Virtual participants may refer to the instructions provided on the first page of today's agenda. Oh, let's turn it off. Let's make sure you're good. Might have to. That's on. I think I heard that. Good morning.
My name is Lauren Hernandez. I'm a resident of Shingle Springs and also a proud candidate for EID Division 2. There's no other way I'd rather start my Monday morning and look forward to doing this more than infrastructure. I can't think of anything more important than water, and that's really why I'm stepping forward to do this. Looking at each and every one of you, and I've had the opportunity to speak with you and get to know you over time, and I think the strength of a board is the diversity of perspectives. It's not agreeing on everything, but it's really coming together and meeting the needs of our community. And also want to commend the staff. I can't think of a probably more well-functioning organization across this county. And so look forward to also the opportunity to work with the staff of the district. My work is in community and economic development here in El Dorado County. My daughter's the fourth generation of our family being raised here in the county. And water, geez, without safe and reliable water, I think there is no community, right? And so can't think of anything more important than this work. I think about, there's thousands of people across California, not overseas, but right here in the state of California who cannot go to that tap and have safe and reliable water come out of it. So I think it's something that is so easily taken for granted, but I don't take that for granted and know that that takes an incredible amount of work from the leadership team here to the staff and to giving direction to make those investments. So I look forward to being part of that. My background, I've worked in public policy for my career at the federal and state level, primarily actually within the national security sector, and working with communities to ensure that they have the infrastructure and facilities that they need to meet the strategic needs and investments of our nation. And so I know how important that is. I know how to think innovatively to bring bold ideas and also meet the immediate needs, but think long-term for our community. So look forward to doing that, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you very much.
Other comments? And I do not see any online. So President Anzini, that concludes public comment. We're ready to move on to communications.
Okay. Communications, General Manager.
Good morning. This morning I have a couple items to cover. The first is the Lynx Trail pavement restoration update. Staff continues outreach to the Lynx Trail zone of benefit regarding the remaining pavement restoration schedule and will provide a status update at a future board meeting. I know there have intermittently been questions from members of the community who were interested in that schedule. The second update is related to a board assignment related to the rock wall restoration. Staff has finalized a memorandum of agreement for the Flume 45 project, including the proposed interpretive display at district headquarters to satisfy mitigation requirements. A similar memorandum of understanding for the Flume 48 project remains under review by the State Historic Preservation Office. Lastly, I'd like to share that I had opportunity early last week to attend a CSDA Special Districts Leadership Academy in San Rafael. I found the training to be incredibly informative. It covered board governance, how boards deal with HR issues, as well as finance, training for boards. There were a lot of board members from special districts there, including staff. It was a great opportunity for me to bring everything that I've learned so far together related to special districts and the specifics on governance and the whys of what's required. And so I found it really beneficial. I recommend it to staff, which I've shared with them, to attend when they can. I'd also like to recommend it to board members if you have time. They hold it twice a year, one time in Northern California, one time in Southern California. But the information was highly beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Clerk to the board, do you have anything to report?
I do not. Thank you.
All right. Board reports. Directors. No one? No one? Oh, that's right. We were on vacation, most of you, not all of us. I was very pleased to watch, and I had invited his name is Jordan Baxter, our hydrologist, to come and make a presentation for the Cameron Park Rotary Club, and our general manager, Pravani, was there also. It was a delight to see how staff does such a report, and it was a small group of people, but they were all enlightened. And I know that we made a hit when one of the persons I saw later on that day, she goes, "You don't know what you did for me." She goes, "Now I know what it means to turn on the tap and that water comes out." And I've always said this because of my years at East Bay Mud or whatever, you can either tap it, run it, or flush it. And it's really important to the basic people's understanding that that is your most convenient item in the house. So anyway, thank you, Jordan, and thank you, Pravani, for attending that. And it's a good opportunity for the public to see what our staff doing and how important it to see how the water gets to their taps. So thank you. Now we'll move on to item E, to approve the consent calendar.
Move consent.
I'll second.
Okay. Been motioned and seconded to approve the consent calendars item. That would be any questions from the audience to ask us about any particular item?
We went a little quick there. I would like to pull item 2 for separate consideration. As an owner of Goldbud Farms, I receive income from providing farm management services for Matt Veerkamp Vineyards as an agricultural enterprise owned by Matt Veerkamp. Although Matt Veerkamp Vineyards is an entity that is separate and distinct from Doug Veerkamp General Engineering, Matt Veerkamp is an officer and partial owner of Doug Veerkamp General Engineering. Therefore, I will recuse myself from deliberations and vote on this item.
So I have one question. Does this moving H3 above the workshop, does that part of the consent calendar? No.
No.
Okay.
No, that's
So
not-
modify, motion excluding item 2.
Yes. And there was a second?
I'll second. My
Okay.
second.
So,
Thank you.
any comments from the public regarding the consent calendar? Please identify yourself.
So I just had a question on number 6. And I haven't really paid attention to the whole Sly Park project, you know, the line going from Carson down. And it was kind of told that that was to have water because it was non-potable. We're making it potable. Is that true? And I'm sorry I come out of the blue, but it's so much work to do all the research, and I used to be on top of everything on EID, and I just, you know, people have been murmuring about that, and I just said I would find out what are we actually doing with this line? And
Sure.
Does it have a goal of going beyond that area? Is this water for El Dorado Hills?
So, could you, for the record, please tell us who you are?
I'd rather not. I don't have to.
Okay, does any staff member want to answer this question?
Andrew's here.
Yeah, Andrew can come up. I think high level we can share, but I think it might be better for us to sit specifically with you and talk through, because it sounded like I heard you say if you were going to get water from it, and I heard you talk about potable and non-potable, so it seems like there's more to your question that I would rather drill into and answer
It seems like
specifically.
this is a massive project that the public is not aware of, and I am Sue Taylor. You can put that down. Everybody, you all know who I am.
You are.
You should, anyway. I think there needs to be more awareness of what this project is really for, because we are spending our water. The debt that EID is so massive that our rates are so high to pay off that debt. And I would like to, I've always wanted that we can't be self-sufficient. Water is so important. And if we keep spending it without any cap, we can't farm, we can't have gardens, we can't have businesses. You know, it's kind of all on your shoulders to try to get us out of that debt and not keep providing for water for developers that are making a ton of money off of us, while we that live here can't afford to live here, you know, and do the things that we did from the beginning of time. This county was always independent. We didn't suffer during the Depression. We've had the resources, and you really control what we can do in this county by the cost of water. So if this project is what we think it is, if it's to provide water for El Dorado Hills developers, I'd like to know that. And so if the cost of a contract, if they couldn't meet their contract and we're just willy-nilly giving them more money to continue, I would like to see it more than a consent item, and to ask why are we paying a contractor more money that already had a contract for the same project? So let's just go to that specific.
That's why we have a on consent, and that's why it can be pulled at discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Point of order, perhaps we should pull item 6 from the consent calendar, finish with the consent calendar, then we can do item 2 and 6.
There has been a motion to approve the consent calendar, and certainly if the board wants to have a full discussion of this item, it would be appropriate to pull it for separate consideration so you can move forward with the consent calendar. But assuming staff is able to respond to the question, and the board could proceed with the motion that's on the table to approve the consent calendar.
I think we would like to have someone respond to Ms. Taylor.
Before John responds, I do want to point out that we've brought this particular item numerous times to this public meeting to explain the specifics on the why. Just for context, but yes, John will speak high level to the importance of this project. And then if we need Andrew to speak to anything related to the specific item on the consent calendar, we can. Quick
question. I had requested, and when the project is done, that we do an after-action report of how we started and how we finished and the process along. When are we looking at that, possibly?
Andrew could give a little bit more specific on that. Construction of the pump station and the main portion of the pipeline is complete. We are doing a last section of the pipeline that runs up Pony Express to tie in. So the original Slide Park intertie went underneath 50 in a casing, and there's issues with accessing that casing and the pipeline within it. So the new pipeline will tie into our Moose Hall transmission main, go under the Ridgeway underpass, and then up Pony Express so that we can access that pipeline moving forward and abandon the direct barrel. So that last section is under construction right now and should wrap up this fall. I believe the contractor has actually until midwinter, January, February, March, sometime to do all the punch list items. But in essence, the bulk of the construction will be complete in November, I believe it is, with final paving, and that leaps into the Lynx Trail notification that we gave earlier. They have temporarily paved Lynx Trail. They'll do final paving. They batch those out into larger sections so that they can get efficiency out of the paving crews. And so final paving will happen at that time.
Yep. I personally think that we should have an information item where we can go into more depth.
Yeah.
Then Ms. Taylor could attend that, and it also gives the board an update of what's going on. I think it's too hard to try to do this on the fly, is my suggestion.
I think you answered my question on the expense district, what you're saying under Ridgeway.
No, so this extra expense is actually a small bypass line at the pump station at Res A, which allows water to continuously flow through that line and bypass down the Pleasant Oak main. There's again, it gets very complicated.
Can I ask a question? Doesn't that provide redundancy then?
No, well,
No?
the Slide Park intertie does. This small change order is only for this bypass line, and what that allows is for all sections of the new line to continuously refresh. It's kind of like a bleed line.
Right.
So what we don't want, there's a small section at the pump station that would otherwise have the potential to go stagnant. And there's always issues with water age as if there's any areas in our distribution system where water is allowed to sit for extended periods of time, so it's potential issues with that. So all this is a small oversight that allows that section of pipeline to continuously refresh as the pipeline, depending on what mode of operation we're in.
Right.
Really quickly, if I can share that refreshing of the pipeline of the water, John mentioned water age, that leads to poor water quality in the finished water disinfection byproducts, which we try to control. So this is a mechanism to mitigate that happening in the pipes.
Great. Thank you.
Right. But Sue, the elevator speech is that this is a pipeline between our Reservoir 1 in Pollock Pines and Reservoir A over by Slide Park, that allows us to be able to transfer water from one end to the other because we have two basic different systems. There was an existing system in the 70s that had deteriorated and is being replaced so that we can ensure safe and reliable water in the event that we have problems with one or the other. And we can, in many cases, use gravity more than electricity. Is that the elevator speech?
Yes, correct. It also provides, again, some form of redundancy between the two plants. At this point, we are very limited in being able to take Reservoir A offline at any time. That is our main water treatment plant for the district. And so this allows us to be able to at least get a source of water from Res 1 down to Res A to facilitate those repairs as well.
Okay. All right. So there's a motion on the floor to approve consent items with pulling of item number 6. Two?
Just two.
I circled the wrong one. Number 2. All right. So the motion is on the floor.
Okay. Just wanted, one more time, we'll now take public comment on the approval of the consent calendar excluding item number 2. If you're present in the boardroom and wish to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name for the record. Virtual participants may refer to the instructions provided on the first page of today's agenda. Okay. President Anticini, that concludes public comment. It does not appear anyone else is ready to speak. Would you like me to call for the vote?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
We have a motion to approve the consent calendar as amended minus item 2, moved by Director Penn and seconded by Director Dwyer. We're ready for the vote. Motion passes.
Okay.
And Madam President, if I could just follow up on if perhaps in addition to the after-action report, which might not be till next year, based on it sounds like, it takes a while to wrap things up, maybe in the next couple of months we can do an information item to do an update for the board and public of what's going on with the project, because we have made changes along the way, and how those changes occurred and why they occurred, and what the overall benefit of the project is.
Absolutely. So we do, that is a scheduled event now. So we do approach the board as part of the annual CIP process. So that'll be, we will give an update for all of our large projects at that point. And then we were just at the board a month or two ago for a mid-year. So, so we try to do that twice a year.
Okay.
And have that schedule moving forward.
Yeah, I wanted to share that it was part of the mid-year CIP that was presented. We covered that. I think what I'd like to do is work to extract out all the historical information that's brought to board meetings, put it together. I'll share it with Ms. Sue Taylor just to help her understanding, and then yes, it will feed into whatever we bring to the board the next time as an item just to help answer some of the questions.
Okay. Now on to item number 2.
Okay.
Move to.
Second.
Okay. Then moved and seconded to approve item number 2 on the consent calendar.
We will now take public comment on this item. If you're present in the boardroom and wish to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name for the record. Virtual participants may refer to the instructions provided on the first page of today's agenda. President Anzini, does not appear any member of the public is wishing to speak on the approval of consent item number 2. Would you like me to call for the vote?
Yes, please.
Okay. We have a motion to ratify the warrant registers for the periods ending June 16th through July 14th, 2026, and automated clearinghouse payments for the periods ending June 10th through July 8th, 2026, moved by Director Penn and seconded by Director Dwyer. Director Mansfield is recusing himself from this item and will not be voting. We're ready for the vote.
Yes, thank you. Board members vote.
And motion passes.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to item number 13, which was moved to the top of the workshop before our workshop. So, presentation.
Good morning, board members and members of the public. My name is Brian Polson. I'm General Counsel. I'm going to be presenting today on the district's board policies and administrative regulations, their purpose, development, and roles. From time to time, the board will recall that I give or have given presentations that are relevant generally to the board's functions as a governing body, things like the Brown Act, Public Records Act, conflict of interest, and then I've given presentations regarding the district's bylaws, meeting procedures, and things of that nature. Today's presentation will follow in this general area. I'll be talking about what are the board's policies and administrative regulations, which I may refer to as the BPs and the ARs. Who does what in terms of their development, changes, how are they changed, and so forth. So that's the intent of today's presentation. Feel free to interrupt me if there are questions along the way. Since 2006, the district has maintained its BPs and ARs. That's when they were originally adopted. Of course, there have been numerous changes to the BPs and ARs over time. Generally speaking, they're organized into 14 different chapters where there is a board policy followed by administrative regulations that accompany it. I'll talk more about the relation between those. And the BPs and ARs can be accessed from the district's website. If you go to the document library, they're fairly prominently displayed there with a link at the top, near the top of that landing spot. The board policies are what we've kind of referred to here on the slide as the what and the why. The board policies essentially start out by saying that the board's role is to provide high-level policy direction in order to achieve the district's mission. The administrative regulations are the how. In other words, they're the sort of detailed rules, if you will, that govern or that put into action the board-adopted policies. So the board policies set the goals, the standards, and the boundaries for district operation, and then the administrative regulations are the details and the standards and sort of the day-to-day. The board of directors adopts the board policies. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Whereas staff, the general manager and myself, the general counsel, adopt the administrative regulations and sign off on those. Here's just an example, kind of a screenshot of one section of the table of contents to give you a general idea of how the board policy or how the administrative regulations fit within the board policies. You can see, again, this is just an example. You can see how we begin with board policy 300 or the 300 series. The BP, the board policy, is 3010. That's the development of the budget. And basically that policy, it's fairly short, it's just a couple of paragraphs. It says that the district's going to adopt an annual budget. It's going to update it. It should make sure that, we're not overspending. I mean, it's kind of high level stuff, right? Underneath that are the administrative regulations that address various topics that are relevant to the board or to the budget development. So for example, implementing the 5-year financial plan, appropriation for contingencies, reserves, financial controls. I strategically picked this as an example to demonstrate today because later in today's board meeting, you'll hear a presentation from Penny Buckman, who is recommending changes to this series of board policy, along with some changes to our administrative regulations. Penny's going to talk about how our current board policy, BP 3010, could use some updating to kind of bring it into alignment with modern practices. She's also going to recommend that we kind of combine two existing board policies. What's not shown on here is BP 3020, which is like a one-liner. It says changes to the budget should be approved by the board. That seems fairly obvious, and it seems obvious to include that in BP 3010, where we say, the budget shall be developed and adopted by the board annually. So I raised that to kind of just sort of provide a little preview for what's to come. Now, also included in her presentation will be to address the issue of reserves. You see there on this table of contents here that reserves are currently addressed in an administrative regulation. That's somewhat uncommon. Most boards have an adopted reserve policy that the board adopts. And so Penny's recommendation will be to elevate the reserve policy to the level of the board so that we're getting the board's direction on what the reserves should be. So that's just a little preview, but I wanted to use that to kind of demonstrate how the board policies or how the administrative regulations function with the board policies. So let's talk about the roles. As I said, the board the board establishes the policy direction. It does that through the hiring of a general manager, a general counsel, and the general manager then kind of directs the day-to-day operations, if you will. The general manager's job is to employ and organize a district staff. The board has delegated authority to the general manager and provided some latitude in how to do that. How should, the district be organized? How many people does it take to run a district? There is generally some discretion for the general manager in making those decisions. Now, of course, if any of those decisions have implications for the budget, that is your domain. The board oversees and adopts the budget, of course. My job, which is also established in the district's board policies, is to be the board's lawyer, the district's lawyer, to represent the district in litigation to ensure that the district has complied with applicable laws. I also, with the general manager, oversee the development of the district's administrative regulations, and we can talk more about that momentarily. So first, how are the board policies developed and revised? Generally speaking, staff or sometimes a board member identifies a need for some sort of policy level direction. Once that need has been identified, staff generally draft language or revisions to an existing policy if there is one, and then we bring that language to the board in a noticed public hearing for the board to consider and ultimately adopt. It takes a majority of the board to adopt and or revise its board policies. Conversely, switching to administrative regulations, administrative regulations, or the ARs, are developed and adopted at the staff level. Again, someone identifies the need for a new regulation or a change to an existing one. We develop language. That language is routed to relevant staff that might have insight into it. And then ultimately, the general manager and the general counsel sign off on the administrative regulation, and it becomes effective immediately. There is no board meeting to consider the administrative regulations. And the purpose for that is to ensure that the district is able to act nimbly, to address situations as they arise, and to make sure that we're providing the kind of direction necessary to implement the board's policy level direction. So, key takeaways here: the board sets the district's policy direction, staff implements the day-to-day administration through the development and adoption of administrative regulations. The board policies require a board vote. Administrative regulations are adopted by the general manager and the general counsel. In the absence of specific board policies or administrative regulations, the board is empowered to interpret the board policies, and likewise, the general manager and general counsel are empowered to interpret and provide direction to staff on the implementation of the administrative regulations. The board, importantly, sets the policy direction as a unit. This is important because it would be very difficult for the general manager to do her job if she was fielding calls from each and every one of the board members every day saying, do this, now do that, do this, now do, right? You could see how difficult that would be. So the board acts as a body, a legislative body, to provide unitary vision and direction to the board. And then, as I said, questions are always welcome regarding the interpretation and the process. So with that, I think that's my presentation, and I'm happy to field any questions if you have them.
Any questions? I think it was thorough enough, and it does look like we're kind of like modifying the control of what the board has done in the past, and I appreciate you bringing that forward. Thank you.
I think, I'll just add one more comment. I think it might have been in my first year. I don't remember whether it was prior to Pravani or maybe during the overlap with you and Jim, but I believe at one point I had asked, I thought it would be useful for the board to maybe receive a periodic memo just with the administrative regulation updates that we could review either in the board packet or an offline memo.
Let me address that if I may. Yeah, a little bit of a discovery on my part. When the administrative regulations are adopted or revised, anytime they're revised, the revised version is posted to the district's website, and then an email goes out to #everyone. what I found out in the development of this presentation is that everyone does not include the board members. We will, we have, Rachel and I made a note of that to make sure that anytime administrative regulations are revised, that the board members are notified of that separately from the general email that by which all other district staff are notified. So thank you for that. And
that scratches my itch. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you for that presentation and the board participating.
We will now open public comment on this item. If you're present in the boardroom and wish to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name for the record. Virtual participants may refer to the instructions provided on the first page of today's agenda. President Anthony, it does not appear any member of the public is wishing to comment. We're ready to move on to the workshop item.
Okay, we'll move on to item G, the workshop on finances.
Good morning, President Anzini, members of the board. My name is Penny Buckman. I'm the District Finance Director. This workshop fulfills the board's request at the June 8th public meeting for a dedicated workshop to give the board the opportunity to review board policies 3010 for budget, 3020 for revisions to the budget, and 3050 financial condition and activities, as well as the proposed reserves policy. To support that discussion, we've included the June 8th presentation along with a few additional slides, but presenting the information in its entirety ensures that the public gets to see everything. Previous board actions include the adoption of the Board Policy 3000 District Business Operations Series that includes what we'll be speaking today on September 11th, 2006. And then on May 23rd, 2016, Board Policy 3010 for the budget was amended. And then June 8th, a public hearing was held for this item, and at this time we're back with a workshop item. Our summary issue includes board approval is required for all board policies. These policies were originally adopted in 2006 with minimal revisions, and then a comprehensive review identified opportunities to update and consolidate district policies that align with GFOA best practices and with the AWWA recommended reserves. Our goal today is to get the board's input and recommendations on the proposed policy revisions, adoption of the budget principles, the designated reserves, and the funding strategies for the trusts associated with pension and OPEB. The Budget Policy 3010, first of all, as we review them, there's red line and clean versions in the board packets. These amendments update the district's financial management in 5 key areas: financial management, budget adoption, debt service, budget revisions, and financial condition and activities. The proposed changes move the district from a 2-year budget cycle to an annual operating budget and a CIP budget supported by a 5-year financial plan. On debt service, the policy clarifies one calculation for debt service at a minimum coverage ratio of 1.2 that does exclude FCCs and water transfer revenues. And finally, the board, this consolidates Board Policy 3020, revisions to the budget, and 3050 financial conditions and activities into a single framework. It eliminates the need for the separate Board Policy 3050 and Administrative Regulation 3051, bringing the budget principles to the policy to be adopted by the board. The new budget principles staff is recommending for board approval are included on the next 2 slides. Adopting these principles directly within the board policy elevates them to the same level of authority and visibility of the district's other governing financial policies. It ensures they receive the same level of board oversight and are not merely administrative guidance subject to staff level revision. We're recommending the budget shall be structurally balanced, reoccurring revenues, fund reoccurring expenses. 2, rates and fees shall be set at levels sufficient to recover the full cost of providing service, including operations, maintenance, debt service, and capital investment. The district shall maintain reserves at board-adopted minimum levels to protect against revenue shortfalls, emergencies, and infrastructure needs. Number 4, reserves and unappropriated fund balances should not be drawn down without board approval and a plan for replenishment. Future debt shall be used only for capital projects with repayment terms that do not exceed the useful life of the asset being financed. And then number 6, the annual budget shall be informed by a 5-year financial plan and linked to the district's capital improvement plan. Rate revenues from each enterprise system shall only be used for the cost of that system. Public funds shall be expended in compliance with applicable law and sound procurement practices that prevent conflicts of interest and ensure competitive purchasing. And financial performance will be monitored throughout the year with material variances reported to the board. And number 10, government required filings and debt service payments shall be made accurately and on time. Staff is also recommending a new designated reserves policy that will replace Board Policy 3020 revisions to the budget. This change eliminates the need for separate administrative regulation on reserves, effectively elevating the reserve policy to the board level. This gives the board complete oversight on the reserves and how they are managed rather than leaving those decisions to staff level administrative guidance. This new policy establishes a formal framework for reserves that aligns with GFOA best practices and reflects the recommendation of the district's municipal advisor. In addition, since the June 8th meeting, we have confirmed that the proposed reserves align with AWWA. A key feature of this framework is that it defines minimum, target, and maximum levels for each reserve type. Establishing these 3 tiers is considered industry best practice because each serves a distinct purpose. I'll provide more information on that in a few slides. Together, these thresholds give the board a clear, structured way to evaluate reserve levels rather than relying on one single static figure. This policy also authorizes staff to use the reserves in accordance with adopted budgets and declared emergencies, ensuring there is clear direction for when and how reserves can be accessed. To maintain ongoing board oversight, the policy requires an annual reserve analysis to be presented to the board alongside with the budget and mandates a formal policy review at least every 3 years in consultation with the district's municipal advisor and bond counsel. And finally, operating capital and emergency reserve levels are aligned with GFOA best practices and follow AWW reserve guidelines, while restricted reserves will continue to follow the applicable legal mandates. So this slide was added since the last meeting. As requested by the board, we've included this chart showing the recommended reserve categories from AWWA. Staff is proposing that the district policy include operating capital and emergency reserves. We feel the capital and equipment reserves can be combined into a single category. The district has historically held an insurance reserve of $1 million. This is included in our proposed reserves. However, it could be managed as part of the emergency reserve if the board agrees. And then a debt service reserve is recommended by AWWA. It's usually typically mandated by bond covenants. The district does not have that requirement at this time, so we're not recommending that reserve. AWWA also identifies a rate stabilization reserve as a restricted reserve type. However, staff feels the operating reserve already serves this purpose for the district and offers more flexibility since it's unrestricted. It also keeps the reserves at a lower amount. It's worth noting that while you can find AWWA figures in various industry research, AWWA's 2018 cash reserve policy guidelines deliberately avoids providing any single recommended number or formula. There is no one-size-fits-all amount. The guidance instead identifies the factors utilities should use when weighing what they need for each of their districts or agencies. It should be based on risk tolerance, debt covenants, and the credit rating goals of the agency. With that said, based on our research into industry standard values, we've applied those benchmarks to the district's specific circumstances, which you're going to see on the next slides. And then I do want to note that we've intentionally left off FCC's pension and OPEB from this slide because they're not designated reserves. FCCs are restricted funding that we put into a separate fund, and they are reserved for capital projects. And then the OPEB and pension are obviously going to be a trust. So this slide goes over the designated reserves and the replenishment. The operating reserve is intended to be used when there's an unexpected decline in revenues or total revenue loss, and will be replenished within 1 year whenever it falls below the minimum. The capital reserve will be used to fund capital projects, including replacements. The district will also try to replenish this reserve within 1 year. Any projects that cannot be funded from debt proceeds or available fund balance will be deferred until the minimum is reached. The emergency reserve will be used for damages caused by a natural disaster, declared local, state, or federal emergency. Proceeds from FEMA or the district's insurance will be returned to this reserve until the target levels are restored. There is no intent to utilize ratepayer funding for this reserve, at least for the replenishment. If the board decides to keep the separate insurance reserve, it will be used to pay insurance deductibles as applicable, and the target will be replenished with insurance reimbursements. As discussed, it's important the policy defines minimum, target, and maximum levels for each reserve type. The minimum protects the district's fiscal solvency and liquidity in the event of unforeseen circumstances or emergencies. The target represents the optimal balance between financial resilience and the efficient use of public funds. And the maximum ensures reserves do not accumulate beyond what is needed. So ratepayer dollars are not being held idle when they could be put to productive use. Together, these thresholds give the board a clear, structured way to evaluate the reserves. The operating reserve has a target of 180 days of cash on hand and a minimum of 90 days. This structure ensures the district achieves and maintains strong credit ratings while retaining flexibility to manage fluctuations in operating needs. And then the capital reserve target is set at the next year's expected rate-funded capital expenditures plus 50% of the following years. And then the any applicable contingency, and then the maximum reserve is set at 5 years of expenditures. The maximum is a ceiling the district will not exceed. As discussed, maximum levels exist to protect ratepayers. The district operates on public trust, and capping reserves prevents holding excess cash without a defined purpose. For capital reserves specifically, the 5-year maximum allows the district to plan and fund larger projects with ratepayer funding rather than going after debt issuance to fund those major projects, which in turn will lower long-term costs. The emergency reserve is new to the policy. It added as a direct result of recent history. The district's operating and capital reserves were depleted due to the Caldor fire and subsequent storms. The emergency reserve will carry a minimum of 1 month and a maximum of 3 months of operating reserves. As previously discussed, the insurance reserve is something the district's held historically and can be combined with the emergency reserve. This chart represents the district's current designated reserves as shown in our AR, administrative regulation. It's based on our 2026 to 2030 financial plan. Our operating has a minimum of 90 days currently and a balance of $18.9 million, which meets the minimum. The capital replacement and equipment replacement reserves are based on prior year depreciation for a total of $29.9 million, currently funded at $17.7 million, which is above our proposed minimum. Below the current reserve, though. The insurance reserve has a target of $1 million and is currently funded. The pension unfunded accrued liability reserve has a target of the annual pension bond minus the annual UAL payment, which should be funded at $2.1 million, but is at 0. Staff is recommending to eliminate this reserve and utilize the CalPERS Pension Trust instead. The current reserves target is at $51.9 million. And that's just one, we have one number right now, so that's what the expectation is. This chart shows calculated reserves from the 2026 financial plan, or through 30 financial plan, which has been updated since our last meeting. It shows current levels, proposed minimum, target, and maximum for each category, and industry average ranges based on the AWW recommended reserve categories. The operating reserve is proposed at a minimum of 90 at 18.9 million. The target would be 37.8 million at 180. These both align with industry standards and our municipal advisor's recommendation to ensure strong credit ratings. The capital reserve is proposed at 13.5 million, and the target is at 23.9 million, compared to the current 29.9 million, which is based on depreciation. This is below the industry average, which typically uses depreciation or a percentage of asset value, which ours would be $50 million at the high end for a target. Staff with our cost of service consultant and municipal advisor recommends the rate-funded expenditure basis going forward because that's what we're actually spending. The emergency reserve is consistent with GFOA and the AWWA reserve guidelines. Establishing dedicated emergency reserve will help to protect our operating and capital reserves going forward. The minimum is 1 month, cost of $6.4 million, and the target is calculated at $19.2 million, which is equal to 3 months. And then the insurance reserve is $1 million, which is consistent with our current levels. The district's proposed target reserve sits closer to the industry minimums at 81.9. This tells us our recommended targets are not aggressive relative to industry standards. This chart isolates the proposed reserve balances and proposed calculated reserve based on the 2026 to 30 financial plan and where we think we could be at year end of 2026 if the policy is approved. The maximum shown on the shaded column, just as a reminder, it's a ceiling that we will not exceed. As previously discussed, the district's operating and capital reserves are currently meeting the minimums. The emergency reserve is calculated at $6.4 million. If the policy is approved, we anticipate funding $4.2 million by year end, or $5.2 if we combine the insurance reserve into the emergency. Reaching minimum levels is expected near term. We anticipate full minimum funding by the end of 2028, sooner if we realize any budget savings in 26 or 27. After reviewing the AWWA's framework at the board's request, our funding recommendation for targets has shifted. Rather than funding through the cost of service, we're proposing a multi-year approach, building toward target gradually through routine budgeting without disrupting rates or the capital priorities in a single year. It's a strategy, not a one-time transfer. Staying above the minimum is consistent with the progress. Consistent and progress toward target levels satisfies the policy's intent. The board requested staff to provide the impacts of funding the targets over the next 15 years. However, the district performs cost of service analysis, establishing rates in 5-year increments, informed by the 5-year financial plan. Staff worked with a cost of service consultant, and if we were to fund to target over our next 5-year rate increases, it would be 6% a year. But again, we're not recommending that. And that percentage does not include any other district needs.
What would it be if we do it over 15 years? Because it is still going to have an effect on our ability to spend on capital projects or effect on rates. Even if we spread this increase over 15 years, it's still going to have an effect because it's money that we can't spend on other things.
Yes, I mean, as long as we're moving towards that target is what the policy's intent is. So if we have budget savings in a single year, we can put it into our reserves. If we have a need for the capital replacement that year to go up, we pull from our capital reserve as long as we don't go below the minimum, and we use that funding. And we just try to keep continually going forward. I mean, if we do it over 15 years, off the top of my head, it would be 1% to 2%. But that's off the top of my head.
Right.
And I just don't think we need to worry about doing it. We don't have to get there tomorrow or even in 15 years. It's just it's a goal for the district to achieve at some point.
I'll have more later.
Okay. We were,
The way that I look at this with my rather simplistic approach to life is that these are really savings accounts, and we're having trouble paying our mortgage right now, and putting more money into savings when you have bills to pay sometimes doesn't work. So I appreciate your smoothing effort that says, okay, this is our goal. Let's systematically build to this target with the least impact on our ratepayers. So I like the approach.
I am going to move on to pension and OPEB next, so if we have more questions on reserves. Okay. So this is, our next is pension and OPEB. These are not, again, traditional reserves held by the district. They are trusts held with CalPERS, structurally different from our 4 reserve categories that we just walked through. They're included in our reserve policy for transparency and board oversight, but they follow their own funding logic. In both pension and OPEB, the strategy is the same. Build the trust now so that investment earnings are the primary funding source rather than ratepayer funding, and it will cover the long-term obligations. The pension trust will need to be established. They actually just introduced that pension trust. They introduced the pension trust after our 2022 bond award, so it's fairly new. Staff is recommending that it be established in the next 2 years of adopting the policy, and then we're also recommending it be at 100% funded before we withdraw any funding from the trust. The OPEB trust has been in place since 2012 and is currently funded at 30%. The overall target is 75%, and that's due to the rate subsidy for retirees. It overinflates our OPEB liability. Our actuary consultant agrees with this approach. Once the trusts are at the targeted amount, the district can then reimburse the annual payments for unfunded accrued liability from the trust, and then as long as the levels don't go below the funding target. So this is the CalPERS actuary report, 18-year, they recommend an 18-year amortization at this time. Normally, most agencies, it's at 25 years, but because we paid our bond off in 2022, we don't need to go the full 25 years. It also offers 15 and 10-year options for paying off our current liability of $14.7 million. Following the 2022 pension obligation bond issuance, the board directed staff to keep pension liabilities at a manageable amount going forward. Those bonds carry a balance of $61.2 million. They should be paid off by 2043 with estimated annual payments of $3.6 million. Separately, the district pays $1.4 million annually toward the unfunded liability funded through rates. Based on affordability and long-term balance, staff recommends the 15-year schedule, the middle option on the chart. If approved, staff will include the cost for 2026 and 27 in the 27 budget. The ongoing cost of $193,000 will be included in the cost of service if approved. To support these long-term pension costs, staff recommends establishing a pension trust through CalPERS, funded by surplus funding of the district's OPEB trust, which is a different recommendation from last time, and budget savings or one-time revenues rather than ongoing rate revenue. So I'm going to go more into that savings in a minute. For OPEB, staff completed an analysis that included several assumptions. Number one is to stay with the highest annual rate of return for options number 2 and 3, but for option 1, the strategy assumes moving to strategy 2 in 2032, lowering the assumed annual rate of return from 7.5% to 6%, but it does provide less risk for losses. Payments could begin in 2029 if the district chooses to go with option 1 or 2. Assume 75% funding status since OPEB isn't established on actuals and can fluctuate. And then finally, we included a 3% annual increase in costs due to rising benefit costs. We're recommending number 3 because it costs the district nothing at this point. And this is where the 15-year funding comes in. It will take us 15 years to get to our funding goal, but it would be gradual and over time. As you can see, there's $689,572 in 2027 that the analysis shows that we do not need in the OPEB trust to meet our funding goal in the 15-year period. So now I would be recommending that we withdraw that and use that to start the pension trust. And then, as previously discussed, the trust, once they're meeting their funding targets, the annual payments, so $1.4 million a year, could come from interest earnings rather than ratepayer funding for pension, and then 2.5 through ratepayer funding would be reimbursed for OPEB once we meet our funding.
I have a question regarding that. Okay, so if we did that, if we created a pension trust, that's going to be managed by PERS, I imagine, right? Because we're creating our own trust.
It's with PERS, but we manage it.
Right, we manage it instead of having some operator, because I do know that other water agencies use different variations. I mean, my own pension from East Bay Mud is managed by an operator through PERS. They had their own pension system. I worked in their department,
Yeah.
so in the very early days, and it seems like, you know, with the operation of PERS, which seemed to be the divinity at that time, it still is, and is one of the largest pension systems, but they're giving us operation and we're managing it.
Yeah, and then we get to utilize the rate of return because
Correct.
So it's such a large fund with them.
Right, okay. Yeah, it is I mean, it's one of the largest in the world, so.
It would do a lot better than what we're earning in Leaf right now.
Okay, thank you.
So there's no immediate funding required for this item. Adoption of the updated policies will support the district's long-term financial stability by formalizing the framework for budget management and reserve levels across the water and wastewater systems. Reserve minimums will be fully funded by 2028 or sooner, dependent on budget savings and additional revenues. And then as a reminder, building toward target levels gradually satisfies the policy's intent. Staff will determine when to request funding for pension per the final adoption of the policies and the board direction. Our next steps, we will incorporate the board's decisions into the policies from today, which will include the budget principles, reserve target funding strategy. Rather we do a phased approach, which is our recommendation, just utilize budget savings over the years and try to budget for reserves whenever we possibly can. And then through the cost of service, if that's the board's desire, or even a hybrid approach. Maybe we do a little bit of both. Pension funding strategies, that includes the board's decision on utilizing OPEB funding to start the pension trust, and if there's a desire to move to the 15-year amortization or keep it at the 18-year. And then we will finalize the policies, prepare an agenda item for a future public hearing, and then our last step would be to implement. And I believe that's all I have. There's no budget, there's no board options since it's a workshop item, but I am still available if we have questions.
Okay, board members, here's your opportunity to ask questions before we move on to the other items.
May I?
Yes, you may.
Yeah, could we go to slide 15, I think it is, page 244 of the packet. It'll help for my talking point.
That was a good one.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, in concept, it's all great. Having savings, having reserves is good. Where I have some issues is the context. We're lacking context of how this is going to affect our capital spending, how this is going to affect the rate increases that we know we're going to have to do. 1 or 2%, if we phase this over time to double the reserves, that's significant. That's not insignificant. That's very significant when added on top of everything else. We're not considering the opportunity cost, because if we have, you look at the proposed target, 80 million, 82 million, that's money that's sitting there and not being productively used. And then we have to go out and borrow money on the bond market and pay 5-6% for it. And this money's sitting there. It's very conservative, and bless you for that. It's yes, probably best practices, but we don't live in a world of we live in reality, not a world of best practices, where, to use Pat's analogy, except I would say not only are we having trouble paying our mortgage, we also got some high interest credit cards, and I don't think we need to be putting more money to sit unproductively into reserves and not be able to pay off those debts, or not be able to do the pipe, have an annual pipe replacement program, or have to raise rates on customers 1 or 2% on top of the how many, gosh knows how much it's going to be for everything else. So I think, again, conceptually great, but I think the board shouldn't be approving a hard and fast policy without context to how it plays into the cost of service study and how it plays into our CIP, and it all goes together. And I think we're putting the cart before the horse. So if we want to have them come back and we've changed the policies from the AR to the BP and all that, that's fine. But having hard numbers, I'm very uncomfortable with when we don't really understand the context and the impact it's going to have on our cost of service study, on our ability to do, whether it's pay-go projects or capital improvement projects. Because it is doubling it from 40 to $80 million is very significant. Whether it's 5 years, 20 years, it's going to have an impact on ratepayers. And our reserves in the past have served us well. We have to have them. It was in 2017 that we had the floods and the washouts, and our reserves helped us replace and rebuild things while we waited for insurance. The ravages of the Caldor fire, our reserves helped us be able to immediately start repairing things, and then we had to build them back up. So we've done well with our reserves and our reserve policies. I don't think we need to go to a more conservative one, at least, again, not understanding the context of how it's going to affect rates and or other capital projects. So that's my 2 cents. I would suggest that if you want to bring the policy stuff back, fine, but not these hard dollars. I think we should wait until we have it all connected to the cost of service study. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a couple, unless you have one. A couple of them. So I understand what Director Day's concerns are. One, I appreciate that you are reforming our previous financial outlooks, and being conservative is so important. The concerns about reserves are also being impacted here in the state of California. And my feeling is, because there's a Proposition 2 that's on the ballot that is mandating certain reserves to be moved from 10% to 20% for state agencies, that is going to have a grandfather clause, or somewhere along the line we're going to be impacted if that is passed. And I'm not saying yes or no pass it, but that particular item is a big subject being talked about all kinds of public agencies throughout the state of California. And the act of reserve is really important. One, I like your outlook on how this should be handled. It's always felt like 2 years ago or whatever, it was like, oh, we got to grab here, we got to grab here, we got to refinance this bond or whatever, because we were operating on not on a budget, on a situation reactive financial gain. We got penalized by it because grand jury complained. And so we have reacted, and we have gotten that out of the discussion that we are refinanced. We've got a new finance department. We have somebody else who's got a different outlook. Your training is different. And certainly with our GM, who's looked at many, many millions of dollars of budgets in her time, I like where we're going. It's confusing to many people to outlook on the amount of where our money is, like a shell game. And that's confusing, even overwhelming for many of us to sit here and look at. But over the past 8 years I've been here, there's been a significant change in the financial outlook, and everything's been always saying, okay, we've got to do the cost of services study. But 12 years prior to that, nothing was ever done. Since I've been here, we've had 3. I think 3. 2? We're on our 3rd one. So we have to kind of look at what is the game plan. And agree, agree with Director Day that they kind of all blend with each other. One, the board policy is really important. To take make the board more responsible for the administrative actions of our staff is very clear now. We are the responsible ones. We don't tell you how to manage your money. You bring that to us, and we make that decision. I mean, the administrative regulations that I've held on my binder is like, they're very old. And I see that change happening. But it's also happening with new ideas of people in the public positions who are saying, wait a minute, we got to rethink how this is going to work. But we got to really be very, very good at the accountability. It is a trust. So I appreciate all of this presentation. I think it's well done. But it will piecemeal into our capital budget workshops and the cost of services study. The thing that I heard you say somewhere in there, that this is a possibility of making sure that our rate increases would be at maybe a 6% area. And you're shaking your head, but I heard that, and I want to hear that again. Because everybody knows we have staff to pay salaries, we have a huge capital, we have a major amount of assets that are always needing to be fixed. And and we are a public agency. We're not a profit. So, it's really important to follow through with that. But I appreciate this presentation, and I believe it brought a little bit more professionalism to how we look at our finances, and so that the public can understand. And I appreciate that. So we're not here to approve this. This was just a little workshop, and we will come back. But I appreciate this presentation because we are now well informed. And we will be more informed as the fall goes through. That's my comment, and perhaps we'll just open up for public comment now.
Can I clarify two things?
Oh, yeah, well, I asked him. Do any board members?
Penny wants to clarify.
Can I clarify two things?
Yes.
So one, the 6% increase, that is for reserves only. It does not
Right.
count for anything else. And that's if you do it all at once over a 4-year period.
Okay. Okay.
And then Director Day, I just want to make sure we're understanding. Our current reserve target in our current AR is $51.9 million. We are nowhere near meeting that. We're at 37.6,
Right.
which would meet almost our new minimum in the proposed policy. So I just want to make sure that we understand that, because that alone, if we meet the minimum before we go out for our cost of service, we do not have to necessarily assume this in the cost of service. It's only if we're not meeting our minimum.
Well, the minimum I'm fine with, because we're close to that now. And I don't know that we've ever, on our capital replacement reserves, I don't think we've ever come anywhere close to what I guess you would consider ideal. But I think we've done all right. So I'm not overly concerned about that.
I'll just add a couple things. So for me, I think the biggest concern I have is if another Caldor fire happens and we have to front the money, hoping that we're going to get money back from either FEMA or insurance, we're going to struggle with where we are today. And the reserves are about the emergencies typically, because everything else we can plan on. Our operating costs going up on an annual basis, those are conversations we can have. The emergencies, the catastrophes that can happen because of where we are, that is the concern, and that would prompt the reserves that we're proposing. I just want to add one small thing to it. We have to remember we're proposing the minimums, the targets. The board, under this policy, has the right in any given year to say stop. We can't fund our reserves because we have all these things going. You're telling me you don't have money to do your capital projects, but you're putting money into the reserve. What we're doing is giving the board the power to be aware of what we're doing in any given year with our budget. How are we funding the reserves? Are we funding? Are we at the maximum? And now the board's like, why do we have in the capital replacement, why are we at 120 million? Those are questions you can ask as board members and give us direction on what you would like to see. All we're saying is that the policies gives you the ability to decide where we want to be. If you want us to just stay at the minimum, that's acceptable. That is the board's direction. Then it's my job, staff's job, to figure out how we make that happen for whatever those years are. So I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that ability. We're not saying that absolutely we're going to target and we're going to go into cost of service and try to fund the target or the maximum. That wouldn't be prudent management of board's direction. It would be through conversation. What does the board see? Here's where our reserves stand. Here's what we think we need in the next year. If we want to enhance it or if we need to replenish, we're going to have those conversations. It's not going to be staff. I think we have to remember that what we're doing is putting the power in the board's hands, because I'm not sure necessarily that the boards had that power previously. If it was just left up to staff to go on the back end and figure out what will happen, what will be used.
Well, one of my concerns is that passing this out of context with everything else is that it'll get baked in, and that to the cost of service study, that 1 or 2% of padding the reserves, and the board won't see it or the public won't see it because it'll just be baked into this multi-100-page document.
That's part of my job, is to make sure that every aspect that relates to board policy is going to be pointed out in terms of what that impact is to a cost of service. This isn't my personal opinion, obviously. As general manager, you give me direction to implement your policies. And if the policies are going to result in cost adjustments that are solely for that purpose, it is my job to bring it to your attention that that is what it's doing, so we can have those conversations and figure out where we want to go. And so I know there are concerns. I know there are concerns about cost of service and what it's going to show and what adjustments we need. I think what we're doing is we're setting ourselves up in the long term to get to a better place, but not forgetting about it in the short term by adopting these reserves, but always ensuring that our board has the ability to tell us in any given year whether you agree with the reserve, if it's funding the reserve in that year as part of the cost of service. If the reserves are pushing us to 6% and then we're adding on everything else on top of that and we end up at a higher percentage and the board decides, nope, that 6% can't be there, that is your right. That's the direction you give us, that we cannot include it. But it's our job as staff to make sure that when we present the cost of service, yes, it's going to be a big document, so I'm not going to disagree with that, but our job is to try to give you all the information that impacts that cost of service, that rate adjustment that will come out of it. So you all can help us decide what gets included, what gets pulled out. We're going to have those detailed conversations, but I'm trying to give a reassurance that you still have that authority. And if you don't see it as part of the cost of service, you can ask, well, okay, I heard this however many months before. I'm not seeing you indicating its impact on the cost of service. I want to see that specifically. My job, as we talk, obviously, is I keep track and I try to make sure that we're looking at all those things and we'll give you the specific information. But that's ability that board members have too, is to ask those questions. But the intent is to get the district in the long term to a better place. We can't get there. 3-4 years is not enough. It is longer term. But just making sure that as we have the ability each year, we're doing what we can, where we can.
My opinion is that, truthfully, we're never going to get to that better place because we're always running behind, And with our projects, you know, I fear we're headed towards double-digit rate increases forever, which are not sustainable for the people in our county. And we have to trim and make sacrifices, and that might include not having the perfect reserves that we want, not being able to build every project that we want, not raising rates as high as maybe we wish we could. We have to strike a balance. So I will be asking how this is impacting as we go along, because I think if the cost of service study is at all like I think it's going to be difficult for the board and for the public to come to grips with. And I think we're going to have to make a lot of these hard, balanced decisions, and this is going to be a factor. You know, we just simply may not be able to. I would just as an aside, I would be curious to know what our reserves, total reserves were back when we had the floods. I think it was 2017, but I might be off a year or so. And what our total reserves were back when the Caldor fire happened. And it was hard on us, but we managed and we did well. And we've been working on building them back up. You know, the chances of back-to-back-to-back disasters, yeah, we're going to have them, but you have to strike a balance with the reserves, and trying to like double the operating reserve and have the emergency reserve, which in my opinion is somewhat redundant. That's 9 months of operating capital, and that's extremely conservative. Why set targets that we're never going to achieve? I guess would be, you know, the other question I have is we set these targets and then we say, well, we don't have a way to fund it because we got to do these other things. And then I don't know, I just like the maximums. We'll never ever have $178 million sitting around and being unproductive. It's not realistic. So why have it there? So anyhow, I will continue to ask questions, and the direction the board gives, I'll of course follow, but I just have a lot of concerns about how this is affecting everybody, and in particular the ratepayers, because we cannot hit them up with double-digit rate increases ad infinitum forever. It's just not sustainable.
Any other board members? Yes, Director Dwyer.
I appreciate those comments, Alan. I just want to point out again that this is not in a vacuum, that these reserves affect our bond rate and our ability to refinance some of the higher interest bonds. So there might be some savings that could offset some of the increase. We just need to be aware that nothing we do is really in a stovepipe, everything's interrelated. So we need to be cautious about what decisions we make and what the impact is on other aspects of our finances.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, these reserves would be earning interest. There would be some additional income that would further offset some of those costs.
And we could put the interest back into the reserve so that it's
to
build them.
But it's not much.
Correct,
we're hand-tied. We can't put it in the S&P 500. You know.
So,
I was just going to add, maybe what Director Day might be looking for, maybe there's a way to bake into this proposal before it's adopted that this would become some sort of an annual workshop item where the board would have further input on how to prioritize the funding, the tapping, the replenishment to mitigate perhaps those rate increases.
I think that's an excellent idea. It's definitely something the board should address annually. I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
Okay, Director Pan.
Oh, I just think, you know, we're just trying to get our financial house in order. And, you know, all the things we've been talking about, we're dealing with that big thing over our head is that aging infrastructure. That is the number one thing. That's why we are struggling so much. And it goes back to deferred maintenance and not raising the rates a little bit a long time ago. And now we're playing catch up. And as you say, it is not a solution that is readily apparent. we're going to struggle for a long time, and with increased regulations and increased costs, but I always go back to safe and reliable. Those are the two things that we just cannot not do. And it is a struggle that we're trying to do, and I appreciate Penny and Pravani working to try and get our ship in order. And it's going to be long term, and we have to make the decisions. We're the board. We're going to have to make decisions in the long term, and it's not going to be cheap. I mean, we just can't avoid that. I think what it's going to try and do is keep it as affordable as possible. And but we have to look at safe and reliable as our number one, and the affordability and sustainability are the things that we're really going to have to tackle. But we just cannot allow the safety and reliability. Going back to the intertie, we had an intertie, and it was built substandard. It wasn't maintained, and now we're paying for it now. Silver Lake and all those major things that are occurring, we have no choice in, and we have a small population base. And this is a redundant conversation. I appreciate all the work you did in trying to give us a better look in the future on how we get to where we need to be. But it's going to be, it's sort of like there's low-hanging fruit, and then there's that difficult long-term stuff. And I always say you start at one end and work toward the middle, and you'll never get to the middle. We're just trying to work our way toward the middle. So, thank you.
Okay. Before we take you to the public, just like I said, I appreciate the fact that we are updating our board policies. The transparency issue is most important. You did a great job today. It might be confusing to the public, but again, the board previously was not responsible or wasn't held responsible unless a grand jury report came. But the administrative regulations were adhered to by staff. Simple as that, and we had some problems there. So, moving forward, I appreciate the fact that we're restructuring who's responsible for the budgets and who's responsible for the administrative. And I think that was brought up very well by our attorney, and now we're moving forward on this one. So, public comment will be received if anybody wants to speak. I know you do.
That people call me and they're freaked out, and so I have to find out, and I don't want to do all the research anymore. So here I am asking questions, and then I sat through this. I've come to EID meetings for decades, and I've always said reduce the debt, reduce the debt. I mean, the state of California is crazy. We shouldn't be following what they tell us to do because they're not functioning. Why should we follow whatever they're telling us we have to do? And a lot of times you find out you really don't have to. So I would just, if we're doing some of that because we're afraid of the state, why would you follow a crazy person? So I want to know how all of this is impacting the ratepayers. That's always my issue. I'm concerned as I look over at the mission statement that there's no agriculture in there. This is an irrigation district. It's like we've all forgot that. I'm one of the families that actually built water lines to get it to our farm, to get it to my parents' farm, that were promised things by EID. I don't have a lot of faith in EID. I feel much better, I'll have to say, today with this board and general manager than I have in a long time. But there's a lot of distrust over the years from actions that they've taken. I remember when we were $200 million in debt, and I was at the board begging them not to build this building, not to do this, not to do that. But yet here we are with this debt, and who is it hurting? It's hurting our rural resources. It's hurting our farmers, our agriculture. So I had this kind of a roadmap as you were speaking, so I hope I can, if I sound disjointed, sorry. So for agriculture to be successful, they have to have sustainability and affordability. So I was a little concerned when you say that's over here, but first we have to have reliable water. But if you can't afford it and it's not sustainable, then you don't get it. So I think you need to also think of those things, especially affordability. One of the farmers talked to me the other day and said they're paying $1,072 for their base charge for water for their farm. For water, that's just for the meter to sit there, which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous that you put all of this debt the developers have put onto this district on the back of farmers. So I have to go to 4. And I appreciate, President Anazami, how you said that the board being accountable for the spending and not staff. That's a blessing because it gets hidden when it's over with the staff. The county's doing that more and more. And then I had written this down. You're a publicly owned service organization. You're not a business. A lot of this sounds great if you're a business with stakeholders and all those things and people that are buying your product, but you're a service organization that's supposed to make it feasible for the people living here to afford their water. And then I agree with Director Day. I want to see the debt paid down and then look at opening a savings account after that debt is paid down. Developers should have been held much more responsible for the debt they have put on the back of the ratepayers. And I think moving forward, the counties, I know, it took me a long time to figure out, county can open up more land for development, and then they say to EID, you got to come provide the water. There's got to be a point that EID says, we can't afford to do it anymore. If you're going to do those things, then you need to charge those developers the full 100% cost of their impact. And that's why people that are murmuring to me about this line that's going through, I'm here, you're going to tap into the American River, you're going to send it down to El Dorado Hills. It's really disconcerting. So I appreciate our general manager that she has spent time with me on some other issues and will spend time on me, because people come to me to ask me these questions. And I really wanted to avoid you because it was such a traumatic experience just trying to save the canal, which we asked EID at that time to spend that money on your flumes that are about ready to fall down and go through the disaster you just went through. And just think, if you had spent the money to enforce those with concrete, you wouldn't. That's another thing that you put yourself in debt. But it was such, people stop coming here because they give up. And I really have faith in this board after hearing you today. And I hope you'll consider the ratepayers, especially our ag industry. Please don't kill ag in El Dorado County. That's one of our most important assets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything else? Anybody from online? Oh, wait a minute. General Manager?
I just would like to take the opportunity to clarify one thing. I heard it a couple times. Developers, the infrastructure needs are being built on the backs of other rate-paying customers at EID. Legally, we're not allowed to do that, and there was mention in the presentation of what's called facility capacity charge funds. Those are specifically from developers for the infrastructure needs to build their developments and get service from the district. Those are funded separately, and that money feeds into any debt service that is undertaken to build that infrastructure. So I just want to make sure that I cover that point, because that's really important.
Yes.
I think there's enough misunderstanding in the community. There is a thought that is out there that the developments are being funded on the backs of ratepayers, and that is not correct. We go through extreme measures to make sure that we're consistent in not doing that to our ratepayers.
Correct. All right.
Yeah, I'll disagree with that a little bit, because the way we structure the FCCs, you're correct. They're supposed to pay for future development. But oftentimes, for instance, Deer Creek wastewater treatment plant was built, and the board back then, it was the go-go days, the build, we're going to grow. And they built that wastewater treatment plant, and the FCCs, from all this growth that was supposed to happen, was supposed to pay for that. That growth has not happened. And in the meantime, current ratepayers have to do the debt service. And so it does affect ratepayers, where our growth estimates, you know, that's one of the concerns we've talked about a little bit with the El Dorado Hills water treatment plant. It's super, super expensive, and a component of that is growth. I think we need to look at and question those growth estimates, because the board and EID have made these mistakes before, and the Deer Creek wastewater treatment plant is going to have to be rebuilt, and it's still never gotten close to capacity, and that future growth, Marble Valley, all that sort of stuff, never ever came and may never come. But in the meantime, current ratepayers do have to pay the debt service. So the FCCs don't always catch up.
Okay. Anybody online would like to make a comment?
President Anzini, I do not see anyone, or nobody appears to want to make additional comments. We're ready to move on to the next information item.
Yes, thank you. So where were we? Item number 12. You're here. That would be engineering. On the zero emissions. Oh boy, what fun this one is.
Great transition. Thank you, Director Anzini. Patrick Wilson, Senior Civil Engineer, here today to present a board update on the district's zero emission vehicle progress process, if you will. Let's see. Oh, apologies. So there was no previous board action on this particular item. So the summary of the issue is state regulations continue to expand and push forward zero emission vehicle fleet requirements. I'll get into our requirements at this time. Staff has conducted, because of those requirements, staff has now conducted an assessment to find potential pathways for us to effectively meet these requirements and also comply long-term with the direction and board policy about fiscal management. And staff is presenting these findings to the board for your consideration, excuse me. So the California Air Resources Board, CARB, has advanced clean fleet regulation that is pushed out. It's primarily transitioning medium and heavy duty, so anything above like an F-150, if you will, so F-250s and up, to zero emissions vehicles, so not the smaller light duty vehicles. That's the current advanced clean fleet requirement. That does require 50% of all applicable vehicles to be zero emissions purchased, allowing only exemptions on a case-by-case basis. I'll get into those in a little bit. This regulation does require 100% of purchases after 2030 to be zero emissions vehicles, and I'll get into some of the challenges with that. So staff is collaborating with a handful of stakeholders in order to acquire those exemptions. The district has received purchase exemptions for for lack of commercially available vehicles. And I won't speak for Greg Royal, our district fleet supervisor, but those have not come easily. That has been a very difficult challenge that he's had to endure for us to actually not only just procure the vehicles, obviously at board level, but then to turn around and work with CARB to actually get them on the road. In parallel, staff has completed this assessment. It's kind of a roadmap for compliance, and there's some challenges, obviously, with any direction that we choose, but I'll kind of go through that as we continue this presentation. So Highland is the company that we ultimately selected to help us with this advanced clean fleet. They also, not only do they do assessments, they do design and everything, if you will, with electric vehicles. So they're kind of, they understand the backbone, if you will, of the infrastructure. So we looked at the charging needs, not just for immediate with any progress that we may decide to take, but the long-term ramifications and what can be done there. We also looked at how to phase it, obviously not being able to procure 195 vehicles all at once that we operate and maintain, but looking at strategies to try to maintain what we can and buy as we can. We kind of looked into that in more detail. And evaluate potential funding opportunities from grant perspectives, and also PG&E does have some items out there as well for us to work with. So we did look at 3 facilities initially. So we looked at our district headquarters here. We also looked at Deer Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant as well as El Dorado Hills Wastewater Treatment Plant. At headquarters in Deer Creek, there is available power from PG&E to utilize to actually build this charging infrastructure if we do decide to go down that path long term. PG&E calls it Rule 29, but effectively what it is it's an application process, if you will, for power. What PG&E provides is the engineering support to help to design on their side from connecting to their power up to the transformer. They would be beholden to a portion of those costs, not 100% of that, and then we would be qualifying to not only the remainder of that, but also to buy the transformers. Those would all have to be sized accordingly, obviously, not just for short term, but long term with that power service. So, if we do decide to go down the Rule 29 option, we would need to size this for all the 195 vehicles. Admittedly, we wouldn't be doing them all at once, but we would have to size that service that way through PG&E. We have been working concurrently with them as well during this assessment. Part of that is to harness information out of PG&E about not only what's available, but what their process would be internally. We do have an agent that's been assigned to our district who's been working with us very diligently. That being said, we've run into a pretty substantial hurdle, which is the El Dorado Hills Wastewater Treatment Plant. There's no power available through PG&E at this time. We are working right now through the Rule 29 process to figure out what the limitation really is. Is it a switch down at a substation? Is it a full line replacement? What is it that would take for us to be able to upgrade that service to be able to bring EVs online? Kind of has a dual benefit. A, it tells us that potential costs associated with that, but B, it also helps working with CARB to be able to provide them some explicit data explaining why at some locations we can't move forward with this electrification process. So there's more to come on El Dorado Hills. I think that's probably a longer term discussion. That process has taken already almost 6 months with PG&E to discuss to get to the point where we are right now. And I don't see that coming to an end at any time in the future. However, staff will continue to work on that to try to figure out what those ramifications would be. So the initial charging estimate, we're looking at about $2.5 million at headquarters. Now that's just chargers from the standpoint of not procuring the vehicles themselves, and I'll get into the vehicles in a little bit. That's about 45 chargers. That also does include a portion cost, if you will, for the power side of things. That does include the conduit and the routing within the district facility to be able to plug in those vehicles. At Deer Creek, it's about $300,000, and that would be, $330,000, and that would be for about 6 vehicles. And that's something that we could, in theory, we have available power at Deer Creek. So there's 2 modes of option that we have there. Rule 29 is where we place on the backs of PG&E a percentage of that cost. There's some sticking points and challenges with that. I'm not going to say that's a perfect roadmap. And then there's the alternative where we do have available power currently at Deer Creek that we could, in theory, potentially utilize for charging stations adjacent to our existing infrastructure. So that's a path that internally we're going to work through. We are working with PG&E to look at Rule 29 on that, on Deer Creek as a whole. However, there is the alternative option that we could just utilize the existing facility that we have there, throw some breakers in, and effectively set up some charging stations. But there's more to come there as facility plans go forward at Deer Creek. Just wanted to be transparent on those options. And then if you look at the electrical costs, we're approximately $220,000 and $30,000 respectively between both of those facilities. Just stand back 30,000 foot level. That's about $4,900 of vehicles, give or take. Right now, we're spending about $5,000 a year on a meter services truck for gasoline, and for an inspector's pickup truck that go down to El Dorado Hills all the time, we're about $2,500 to $3,000 on those. So a little bit of an uptick in some of the areas, but it's kind of an average, if you will, at that $4,900. Yeah.
Hey, Patrick.
Yeah.
Why, instead of putting charging stations here at headquarters, why don't we just go across the street and charge them for free at the bus station?
If only it were free. I think one of the main struggles, obviously, Director Dwyer, that we'd have with anything outside of our walls is midnight parking, right? I mean, the majority of our charge time is going to happen at night. You know, the biggest struggle that we're going to have with any of these options, and I'll get into our emergency side of things as well, is charge duration. You know, there's other agencies that have pushed forward and, that have gone into this element, and there's obviously struggles with that. And I think with the amount of leaks and repairs that we have throughout the day and the year, for that matter, it is a very excessive challenge that we would have to take on in order to manage how to maintain and keep operational those vehicles. Because if you think about it, we're not going to buy duplicate replacements to keep in the yard and out in the workday, right? So we're going to have to utilize that infrastructure all day, come back, charge it quick enough to be able to go back out to respond to an emergency. So as that technology works forward, yeah, I think we've got an opportunity to potentially move forward with some of this project, but yeah, obviously outside charging would be very limited on its resourcefulness in that circumstance.
And I'll tell you, across the road, there's a lineup of staff charging their cars. You typically cannot get a space, so.
Priority service. So as far as the assessment goes, we didn't focus obviously on the whole 195 vehicles. We looked at those 3 facilities, which totaled 137 vehicles, 33 of which we do feel are candidates for the zero emission vehicle replacement. That meets the following 3 criteria. So age, mileage, that's combined really. From our standpoint of replacement, it hits that key. It's also non-emergency vehicle uses, as I was just kind of getting into. You know, one of the big struggles is the available equipment from a manufacturing standpoint. There are a lot of uses that we do that a lot of other agencies don't. For example, geography is a big challenge that we have to utilize, and Highland spoke on this in the report. You know, we're working anywhere from 600 feet in elevation, turn around, have a leak, have to go to Pollock Pines, go up to 4,000 feet. A lot of these zero emissions vehicles really struggle with that transition in terms of the amount of mileage that they're able to calculate out of that battery charge. So Highland did a great job of describing a lot of the topography related issues that we have in this area that doesn't really come across in the grand scheme of moving to zero emissions vehicles from the standpoint of looking at it holistically. So we did look at, you know, these vehicles as a whole. We kind of ruled out for the immediate interim the emergency vehicles, which would be, you know, your semis, any large duty trucks, the Vactors, that kind of thing, because there isn't really to be totally transparent, there isn't something that we can go buy today that will be one for one, like for like. And because of that, it makes it very challenging for us to be able to look at not only just from the sizing of the transformers, if you go back to the PG&E side of things, but also long-term from an ownership perspective, which I'll get into in a little bit as well. So the assessment identified some potential grant opportunities that are out there. There were 4 that Highland really looked into. We'll continue to monitor them as they go forward. There's battery backup systems. There's you know, carbon offset. There's also zero emission vehicle purchase offset costs that are out there. A lot of these programs and grants that are out there are oversubscribed, and so they're on kind of a revolving door, if you will. You have to almost have a shovel-ready project in order to apply for some of them, not all of them. So that does make it a little bit challenging from our standpoint. But that all being said, because they have historically in more recent times been oversubscribed, it does make it challenging for us to really put a ton of weight into any one of those at this time as a perfect offset or a great means to do it. That being said, we're still going to continue to monitor those as they come up, and as we fit into the right mold, we will be applying going forward. So of these, so the zero emissions vehicles do have a significant capital investment, not only in the initial investment, but also long-term ownership and operation of these vehicles. There is a very on the large scale to meet the current ACF requirement, there's a very minimal amount of available vehicles that we could utilize in potential use for day-to-day operation that make it also challenging for ongoing needs within this community. And because of the ongoing regulatory uncertainty and present substantial implementation challenges, not only just at the headquarters, but potentially if we have you know, clarity on El Dorado Hills wastewater treatment plant, it does add a significant cost in order to complete that infrastructure-related work and then procuring the vehicles. So staff is recommending at this time future charging infrastructure for both headquarters, Deer Creek wastewater treatment plant, to be in turn in the master plan and capital improvement plan planning efforts due to the limited funding, as we've just recently heard about. And staff will continue to evaluate prioritizing standalone charging infrastructure as it makes sense throughout the district and meeting those purchasing requirements. Informational item, any board comment?
Comments?
Yeah, Patrick, I got a couple. One is the appropriate vehicles that were presented. I know Ford stopped making, at least temporarily, the electric pickup 150, but the other one, that using the smaller Ford to replace our SUVs that often carry 4 people or 3 people with a small sedan and no room for equipment, just doesn't seem to be a fair swap. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're 100% right. Ford's kind of paused the Lightning, if you will. GM is still making their pickup equivalent. With that all being said, with respect to the SUV side of things, one of the other main challenges that we have in our line of work is obviously snow conditions, variable conditions from that standpoint. Any four-wheel drive that we procure will need to be able to obviously have everybody within that vehicle that we had in the past. But there are some limitations there with charging. One of the main challenges, obviously, with, I'm not going to get into too many specifics, but this one is interesting. But the vehicles have to maintain these EVs have to maintain a certain internal temperature. So at some level, they're running in order to maintain that, which arbitrarily drains your battery. So it's this offset cost of trying to be able to maintain that infrastructure and be able to do it. To your point, Director Dwyer, I think that there are options that are out there from an SUV standpoint. They obviously aren't going to be Ford or GM. They're going to be some other, like a Rivian alternative, which is what Caltrans has pushed into. There's limitations with that. Range is one of the big issues with those Rivians, and they all have their own challenges, whichever gamut we end up going down. Absolutely.
The other concern I have is productivity, because we're going to potentially have our technicians sitting idle while they're charging their vehicles at some point. I know the intent is to charge them overnight, but you're not always able to do that. So what's the impact on our productivity and ultimately the ratepayers for us to do this?
Yeah, and that's kind of why we split off, if you will, the emergency side of things. So that included not just standby, Director Dwyer, but that included anybody who could respond in the middle of the night to an emergency at that point. So we focused in on vehicles that have, I don't want to say set schedules, but are very routine. From meter services, for example, primary example, we know every night that they're going to be back in time. They'll have the whole night to charge. Those are the vehicles that we zeroed in on out of those 33. They're included in that list. The vehicles that weren't included were any ones that could potentially, to your point, respond after hours and subsequently not be fully charged by the next day. And you're absolutely right. There's no guarantee they plug in at night that PG&E doesn't shift the power off at this building. There's all sorts of goofiness that could obviously happen there. The way that Title 29 is set up, Rule 29, apologize for that. Not Title 29. Rule 29 is set up with PG&E. They're providing up to the transformer. So we could, in theory, do a battery backup to it, but there's some significant limitations with that. So that way we would effectively guarantee that we would recharge the vehicles that are in it's compounding, if you will. And so there's some challenges with that. That is one of the alternatives that PG&E is proposing in El Dorado Hills. We haven't exhausted that to its end yet, but we are looking at potentially battery backup because there's off-peak available power at PG&E. It's the on-peak side of things where I think that's going to shift going forward, right? So right now, between 9 p.m. and effectively 4 p.m. the next day, you can find those off-peak times to charge vehicles. I think that's going to continue to shift as we continue to go to EVs in California. So it's going to make that even more challenging, if you will, to charge at night, I think, long term. But to your point, that's why we kind of siphoned off those vehicles and looked at what is routine enough that we could actually forecast charging every night and not have that as an issue.
Thank you. Yep. Glad that you looked at all the ins and outs.
Painfully, yes.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's a laudable goal to have cleaner air, but unfortunately some of these rules, and they did the same thing with the two-stroke engines, right, where they just threw it out there with a hard stop, and the market is not there as far as, like in the landscape business, the guys are using their equipment all day long. There's no chance for them to, would have to have multiple, haven't gone electric because we just went out and bought a lot of gas-powered stuff, and then now it's creating a black market for that stuff. But you'd have to have multiple sets of batteries. There's no good charging facility where we store the vehicles. It's the same sort of things you're dealing with. Your charging is here, but you keep them over there, and it's great. Again, great laudable idea, but it should have been more practically implemented and phased in more carefully. And the state's not even taking into account the tens of millions of lithium batteries that are going to end up on the side of the road or in the landfills. They're not all going to get recycled properly, and that was not even taken into account. So it's again, laudable idea, but not great implementation.
So, anybody else?
Yeah. As with Director Day, the word laudable kept on going through my head, right? But there's just another quality to this is that the technology is advancing so quickly outside the United States, I want to say, that with the dismantling of, clean energy currently, that what we're going to see around the world is advancements where we will get 600 miles to a charge and a 15-minute charge. And building an infrastructure for today's circumstances for a significant capital expense and ongoing charges is to the detriment of our organization and to the long-term environmental benefit of the world. And it's, again, laudable, but not appropriate for our needs and I think for everyone else.
Well, okay, I'll make one comment about that one, a couple of them. One, it was a big topic of discussion when we went with the Mountain County Water Association going to Legislative Day. We asked all of the senators and assembly members who met with us individually about the zero emission. Of course, this law, this climate change thing that is currently in operation to get us all in there to year 2030 impacts the Mountain County waters because we have snow. We have to have four-wheel drive. A lot of the reliance of, as you've already pointed out, is not beneficial. So hopefully, what they expand the exemptions rather than not following through is important until we get to that point. And my own opinion is this country is the one who's created all of the solar advantages, and now the rest of the world is benefiting while somebody's cutting it back. And you do or you don't. Anybody's invested solar on the roof know how expensive it is if you can't purchase it outright. When to my benefit, we were able to get a battery backup to hook up to our solar. So I'm kind of happy, but I'm still getting a PG&E bill. And it does work, but individually, when it comes to the cost analysis of how much we're paying for gas per year on these versus how much to put the infrastructure in for plugging in, it doesn't justify our means right now. And so it's kind of difficult. We need to continue to lobby with those who make the decisions, even though climate change is part of a problem, and we do support trying to keep our air clean. So appreciation for that report. And any future things coming forward on purchases? Nothing. We'll see that in another report, right?
I guess we could say keep on track.
For now. Yeah.
With diesel. So this concludes.
We will now take public comment on the information item. If you're present in the boardroom and wish to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name for the record. Virtual participants may refer to the instructions provided on the first page of today's agenda.
On the action, okay. All right.
President Anzini, it does not appear any member of the public is wishing to comment. We're ready to move on to the action item.
Yes, thank you. Item number 14.
Before we start this, to stay consistent with my prior recusals, I think I'll recuse myself from this this item for the same reasons as I earlier stated in the meeting, since Doug Bierkamp General Engineering was one of the original contractors on this project.
And since you lost your congressional primary, you've got a lot more time on your hands, right?
It's a tease. Mr. Goldman.
All right, yes, good morning, Board. Daniel Goldman, Senior Civil Engineer here at the district. I'm here today to present on the Reservoir 1 Floating Cover Emergency Replacement Project, specifically give a final project update, and recommend a resolution be signed or passed to end the emergency declaration. So we'll go quickly through previous board actions, just touch on a couple of key points. So the project was initialized in September of 2025. October 14th, 2025 board meeting was the adoption of the resolution declaring an emergency, along with ratification of several emergency contracts that were authorized by the general manager to get the project underway. At all subsequent board meetings through June 22nd, 2026, we did ratify that resolution to maintain the emergency declaration. There were also various levels of project funding authorized along the way, but the large contracts were in that October 2025 meeting. So I will take us through June. Again, that final resolution ratification was on June 22nd, which brings us here to our July meeting today. So summary of the issue, Reservoir 1, or Res 1 as I'll refer to it, is a floating cover and liner required replacement. We had a failure there, which was identified during a routine inspection. We adopted the resolution 2025-039 on October 14th to declare an emergency, and the resolution was ratified again through that June 22nd meeting. Now the project has reached final completion, and we are recommending ending this emergency declaration. So some background on the infrastructure. Again, this is a 2.8 million gallon lined and covered drinking water reservoir that has a dual purpose. It serves as a chlorine contact basin for the Res 1 water treatment plant, as well as a distribution reservoir when the water treatment plant is offline. And the previous floating cover had been in service since 1989, which, as we have discussed at past meetings, far exceeds the expected lifespan of that piece of infrastructure. District facilities operationally impacted by the project expanded beyond Res 1 and the water treatment plant there. Moose Hall Reservoir and Pump Station were heavily impacted, along with Sportsman's Pump Station and the Pollock Pines Cedar Grove Camino service area. So background and some challenges here. These are kind of things that we knew entering the project in the fall. We knew we had a limited window to perform replacement of the floating cover. As it is a part of the water treatment plant, it needed to be completed during the annual winter outage of that plant before spring demand increased. And as we know, that's something that can be relatively uncertain. We have a general time frame each year, but depending on weather and the water year and precipitation, that can be variable. So along with that comes schedule constraints for the project. You have things such as the limited design window, so that we could get into material procurement and meet some of those lead times to get the equipment on site to get it installed in that limited window. So those were a couple of the challenges that we foresaw and tackled. And then finally, Res 1 could not be bypassed using existing infrastructure. This had been identified going into the project. We knew that a complex bypass and shutdown was going to need to be coordinated with temporary storage and some pump station modifications. So looking at a project timeline here, there's a lot going on the slide. I just want to draw your attention to what's highlighted in red there. As I mentioned, we started the project in September of 2025. In March of this year, we had the reservoir back online. So we substantially completed the project in 7 months, which is pretty accelerated timeline for something like this. We'd normally be well over a year from kind of conception to completion. So key dates there in the bottom corner. December 10th, we took Reservoir 1 offline. That's the reservoir itself. The water treatment plant was already down for its winter outage. And then Reservoir 1 returned to service on March 19th, 2026, so a little over 3 months. So we'll talk about some of the bypass infrastructure that had to be implemented before we could take the reservoir offline. Walking through these photos here on the left, we have a 24-inch bypass line that was installed in October to get water from our distribution system up to our temporary tankage. We also had modification to some aging infrastructure. We had the EDM 1 vault there, or El Dorado Main 1 vault, which we needed to perform some piping work in. Unfortunately, the configuration didn't allow for us to get the equipment inside we needed to, so that's the photo you're looking at there. We're cutting the roof off of it to get things moving. And then we have the temporary tanks, of course, which you've seen several photos of. Those acted as a temporary reservoir one during the winter months.
What was the capacity of that temporary?
Just over 120,000. So normally we have 2.8 million. So
right.
Big difference. And that leads us to here. It's why we were installing variable frequency drives at Moose Hall. Right, we needed to increase our level of control out of this pump station up the hill. Only working with 120,000 gallons of storage. So we have these rental VFDs that were installed at Moose Hall there on the left. And on the right, we have an emergency pressure reducing station, or bypass, that we installed at Sportsman's Pump Station. With the goal here being kind of a value engineering perspective, right? We rented the VFDs knowing that those aren't something we need in perpetuity. But the bypass at Sportsman's is something that we could use in future power outages and emergency events. So that was installed as permanent infrastructure. And then we got into some unforeseen challenges while we were performing testing in advance of the bypass. One of the major challenges that we came across was isolation of Reservoir 1. So on the left, we have slide gates that we were testing at the distribution at the exit of the reservoir into the system. These were original 1960s to 1980s era equipment, depending on what specific piece we're talking about. We are at full close on those valves during that test in the picture on the left, so you can see they were leaking quite substantially, which forced us to pivot. And the two photos on the right are of the SPI and EDM1, the two main transmission mains that leave the reservoir. We're installing valves in those vaults, actually on the shutdown day itself, which we'll get into, to replace the failed isolation infrastructure that we identified during the planning effort. So the reservoir shutdown was also quite complex. As we just mentioned, we had those failed gates that prevented us from doing a standard kind of isolate the reservoir and then get the water out. We were forced to work with Division of Drinking Water to draw down Res 1 via gravity. It's kind of a live drawdown event. We then installed valves on the SPI and EDM1 to allow us to get back to a full restore. And we did originally send out 842 potential outage notifications for a 13-hour outage. We were able to limit the outage that day to 42 customers for about 9 hours.
Wow.
So it was a long day, but everyone involved was happy with the outcome. So I'll go over this very quickly, just kind of an explanation of what we were operating with over the winter while the reservoir was offline. Anything in red is temporary or was part of the bypass system. Anything in blue is permanent infrastructure. So again, we installed new isolation around Reservoir 1, the temporary tankage and pipeline shown there at the top left, as well as the modifications at Sportsman's and Moose Hall. So now we'll get into construction. We mobilized on January 5th of this year after approximately 8 weeks of off-site material prefabrication of the new cover and liner material. Substantial completion was again reached on March 19th, and final completion just recently in July, which had some long lead items that were outstanding, but the reservoir, again, has been operational since March. On the left, you have a photo of Res 1 after the initial shutdown was performed. It's a little bit tough to see, but there are some folks walking in the reservoir there for scale. They're kind of towards the far end, so just to kind of paint the picture of how large of an effort this was.
Yeah.
On the top right, we're performing some subgrade repairs to some sloughing on the side slope underneath the original liner. And then bottom right, just a photo of us tearing that old floating cover out. A few more photos here, and again, some folks working in there for scale. On the left, moving left to right, we started with installation of a new geomembrane and then the liner material. So you can kind of see the dull colored material and then the more shiny material, that's the liner. And then as we move to the right, you see some outlet modifications there in the bottom photo, and then installation of the new cover and the associated floats, hatches, vents, appurtenances, things like that. Construction was not all smooth sailing. We did have quite the storm event in February. Although we were largely fortunate with the weather, we had 3 days of pretty severe winter weather that ended up leaving about 3 feet of snow on the job site. One thing to keep in mind, normally when snow falls on our floating cover reservoirs, there's water in those that keeps, it's essentially a source of heat to melt the snow so it doesn't accumulate on the cover itself. This was during construction, so the reservoir was empty and snow accumulated on the reservoir just like any other part of the ground. As it fell on the side slopes, it sloughed down to the toe and kind of compacted and piled up there. Some areas were 15 feet deep from it sloughing down off the side slope, so it was quite an effort, but the crews did a great job. We had high pressure water, hot water, sump pumps, and just selectively melted the snow and pumped it out in locations that we needed to continue working. And they just went day by day, and we were able to get ourselves to construction completion in March after the snow melted. A couple of photos here of some finished products. On the left, they're performing top left, they're performing a final wash down of the new floating cover, and then the top right, a picture of it nice and clean there after the installation was complete. And then across the bottom, just a few photos of the electrical system associated with the rainwater management system that's on top of that cover to keep the rainwater from accumulating. So quickly, we'll talk about project costs here. Total funding to date is just over $2.7 million. Of that, just under $1 million was bypass implementation. So that's subcontracted labor and contractor support along with rental and equipment purchases to get the bypass in place. Then we have the cover and liner construction, which was through erosion control applications, the general contractor, just under $1.2 million. Just under $400,000 in professional services support for engineering, construction management, inspection, things like that, and about $160,000 in capitalized labor. Worth noting here that although this was done on an emergency basis, we do have 6 other floating covers in the district, and we did learn a lot from this project, and we understand the cost of replacement. Certainly, doing it firsthand. Yep.
Yeah. Question: how large are those others?
Some are larger than Res 1, some are smaller.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So we came to the board, I believe, in August last year for tank and reservoir master planning. That process is underway. We'll be wrapping up this fall. So these numbers do help us refine those estimates, and we'll be coming back this fall, likely with another update associated with those other floating covers and tanks as well. So before I get to the wrap-up slides, we did want to put in a thank you to everyone in the district that helped with the project. SCADA, E&I, maintenance, construction, engineering, GIS, distribution, operations, inspection, treatment, all the way to customer service. There were tons of folks involved that made this happen. It really, truly was a team effort. So
this is the capitalized labor.
Yes, this is the $160,000. But no, just wanted these folks to be recognized because it really was, it took a village. So board options. Option 1, adopt a resolution ending the emergency declaration for the Reservoir 1 floating cover emergency replacement project, project number 25040.01. Option 2, take other action as directed by the board. Option 3, take no action. Of course, our recommendation is option 1.
I'll move option 1 with a quick comment. This is a true success story, and thank you all. All the people you had mentioned on the slide, but basically the engineering staff that figured out how to do this and use some innovative workarounds to continue to supply our customers during the outage, to the operations staff that worked together with engineering, and of course customer service that were able to communicate to all of our customers. So I think it's a huge success story. What's the service life of our new floating cover?
Yeah, generally the floating covers are a 20 to 30 year asset.
And now have we programmed in to replace the Res 1 cover in 30 years from now? Do we have a planned
Yes. Like I said, we're going to be back with the tank and reservoir master planning later this fall. And Res 1, even though it's a brand new asset, is included in that analysis.
Good. Thank you very much.
I'll second.
All right. So now we have a motion to second. Thank you.
If I might, as I remember, the preferred replacement of Res 1 was a concrete structure. And I do wish the member of the public that was here earlier would be here for this presentation because it is indicative of many of the issues within our organization. Say that Hyplon cover was put there in 1989. That's a long time, well beyond. I mean, I remember being up there and I just looked at that thing and it tore. And the fact that that it was kept going for so many years, but it really is indicative of, I just feel like a broken record. There's aging infrastructure with deferred maintenance. Aging infrastructure with deferred maintenance. Now we spent several $1 million where that several $1 million could have been spent on a concrete structure that would last 50 to 75 years. And so we, the ratepayers, are having to pay now for what was not done in the past. I am hopeful that when we have to do the plant itself, that those infrastructure improvements will also be able to be applied. I know that the staff thinks about that, but now we have a solution, and as Director Dwyer indicated, the phenomenal work that was done to get this up and running, but was not the optimal the outcome that we really needed. Again, this is just indicative of the world we're living in, where we're paying more money for something that's less than ideal, and that was done on an emergency basis rather than planned. But this is, folks really worked hard, and they're to be commended. Thank you.
Thank you.
Compliments to the staff. Murphy's Law did not prevail, and 7 months is quite an achievement. So you should be proud of that, considering the snowfall kind of set everybody back. This is an item to vote for. First of all, anybody from the public wishes to make a comment?
We will now open public comment on this action item. If you're present in the boardroom and wish to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name for the record. Virtual participants may refer to the instructions provided on the first page of today's agenda.
Anybody online?
Nope. President Anthony does not appear any member of the public is wishing to comment. Would you like me to call for the vote?
Yes, please.
Okay. We have a motion to adopt a resolution ending the emergency declaration for the Reservoir 1 Floating Cover Emergency Replacement Project, project number 25040.01, moved by Director Dwyer and seconded by Director Penn. Director Mansfield has recused himself from this item. We're ready for the vote. Thank you.
Lori, make sure we get checks.
I'm not touching it.
And motion passes.
This is a golden buzzer. All right.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
So we would like any comments from the general manager before we adjourn this meeting. All right. We will adjourn until August 10th. Correct?